Welcome. So good to see you all for our fifth Four Simple Words forums. Really grateful for your time to come in and be a part of our conversation. See lots of familiar faces. I see some new faces as well, which is fabulous, and really appreciate your time. And quite frankly, looking to hear your voices as well today and throughout this conversation that we're having. Again, we'll be using the chat box. If you've got questions or comments, I encourage you to jump in there and leave some of that. And in fact, as I'm just kind of setting up our morning and we're going to do a formal introduction of our very special guest, Sarah, let me just plant a question with you. The question is, what are your perceptions, positive and not so positive, of servant leadership? We're really chatting, having this conversation, this Four Simple Words journey is about this idea of servant leadership. And quite frankly, my perceptions have radically changed since we pushed the button on this on March 8th. So that is the journey that we're on today. So I'm going to do some introductions and some welcomes, set a little bit of context. Promise not to take long, but during that time, if you want to think about and make some notes and drop them in the chat, or we'll invite a few people in. What are your perceptions, positive and not so positive, around servant leadership? Would love to hear that, because that really is the core of our conversations today. So with that, 2 acknowledgements to get us going, as we always do with our 4 simple words. The first is a land acknowledgement. And I just want to acknowledge that wherever we are sitting today, wherever our computers are, I see people from, I think, all over Ontario. So appreciate your time. I just want to acknowledge that we are all sitting in communities that were, that had communities before them. And before Canada was Canada, it was a group of strong, vibrant, wise, resilient communities that were living on this very land. And they modeled for us how to steward our air, our water, and our land. Unfortunately, we have not done a very good job in following their leadership or their wisdom. And I just want to take a minute to acknowledge that. I learned last night there's 1.7 million First People, which would be Indigenous, which made up through Métis, First Nations, and Inuit. And the word that was used in the session I was on last night was beautiful people. And I thought that really resonated with me. We've got 1.7 beautiful people in our country whose cultures have tried to teach us. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that our success is literally built on top of theirs. And I think we need to remind ourselves of that as we have these conversations around what it means to serve others. And the other part to that, of course, is that truth has to come before reconciliation. So I thank you for that, and just a chance to acknowledge the land that we're on. The other acknowledgement is a personal one, and if you've been on our sessions before, you've heard this before. It's more a statement of fact. I was born white, male, middle class in Southern Ontario in the 1970s. When you combine that with the fact that I'm happily married to my beautiful wife, Melanie, I check just about, not just about, I think I check every box of privilege there is. And so I want to put that out there today, because it's really important that I acknowledge that my journey to our screen today may have been radically different than many of yours. And so my perceptions and my experiences have been different, not better or worse, but different. And so it's up to me to acknowledge that. And also, I want to say that because some of your journeys to the screens have been different, harder, perhaps not as positive, that makes me feel terrible. And one of the things I'm hoping to do through 4 Simple Words and our work at Pearl Street is be the best ally I can be. In fact, I've built a business and a career helping other voices sing. So I want to acknowledge the privilege I bring to this. If I need to be held accountable on any of that, by all means, please do. And please know that this is part of my learning journey in trying to figure out the best way I can use my privilege to help others sing. Those are 2 acknowledgements. And now I want to make a confession, and I've made this before, and it's a tough one for me, but I'm 50. I don't know how that happened. I keep looking at my birth certificate thinking, okay, this can't be right, but I turned 50 in March. And that was, as I reflect back on that, and as one gets to these milestones in life, you kind of reflect back and think about, some of those people or moments in your life that have impacted you. And this is the force of the word story, because as I was doing this reflection, and I promise I'll be quick here, I was thinking about, I got to think a lot about my grandmother. Elsie Curtis, in fact. And Elsie was one of my favorite people in the world. I'm a feminist I am today because of my grandmother. I loved her. She was strong. She was smart. She could do anything. Bit of a badass, really. Like, she was just a tough, strong, vibrant woman. And I spent a lot of my younger years with Elsie, having lots of conversations. And it was during one of these conversations that Elsie did a bit of a mic drop for me on these 4 simple words. And at the time, I knew they were important. And reflecting back at this time of turning 50, I realized, oh, these four simple words have really had some profound impact on how I've raised my kids, how I've tried to be a life partner, tried to be a boss, be a community leader, my own faith. And so that's where this journey of 4 simple words has started. It was this idea of this gift from Elsie, and we're taking this year to kind of explore what that looks like. And the 4 simple words, you've probably heard them before by now, but they're really simple. It's not about me. It's not about me. And those 4 words have followed me all my life and have gotten us here today, where we're having and thinking about this idea of servant leadership. And I'm going to be honest with you, the journey started in one place, and it has radically shifted for me. And what it means, you know, I used to think servant leadership was kind of the be all end all. Through these conversations and through my reading and learning and listening to their voices, I realized that the term servant leadership's got a lot of weight to it. It's got a bit of a branding issue, to be honest with you, and understandably so. The word servant, again, this comes back to privilege, has a lot of weight to it. So our goal with 4 simple words over this next year is that we're going to rebrand and rethink about this topic, this subject of servant leadership. We're going to find a new way to talk about being in service to others without me having to be less than you are. And I think that's the magic. And that's where this conversation today started. As we were thinking about getting ready for the fall, people were often saying, well, what's the relationship between servant leadership and faith? And quite honestly, it is white, male, and upper middle class. Lots of speakers who talk about servant leadership have a strong evangelical background. Nothing wrong with that. I want to be clear about that. But there's other voices and learnings that we can have around this. And that got me thinking, why do other faiths, what's their relationship with service? So that's how we got to this mini series that we're starting today with Sarah. And we're really looking at this idea of being in service to others with a faith lens. And so we're really lucky that we've got Sarah today, who I'll formally introduce in a bit. We've got my friend Lakdeep, who's going to be joining us on the 30th. And Lakdeep is a Sikh, not a Sikh. I mean, talk about learning and privilege, right? Like, oh my gosh, it's Sikhism, not Sikhism. And then we've got John Borthwick, who any of you are from the Guelph community will know John. He's at St. Andrews. So we're looking at, this mini series is looking at being in service to others through the lens of Islam, Sikhism, and Christianity. And I want to be really clear that our guests are not necessarily experts in their faith. What they're experts in is how their faith is empowering them at home, work, and community. So we're not asking them to carry all the good and bad that, of course, their traditions bring, but we're looking for their lens on what it means to follow their faith and be a servant leader. Does that all make sense in terms of how we got here and what we want to accomplish today? Yeah, excellent. Before we jump in, I'm going to formally introduce Sarah, who you're going to love, and I've had the pleasure of meeting, and we're just so lucky to have her here today. Any comments in our chat about these perceptions around servant leadership? And I see something here from Liz. It says positive. Leadership is not about you. It calls us to be something bigger and better and beyond our ego. Yes, ego. There's going to be a whole series here around ego, right? And the negative, the connotation of an imbalance of power dynamics. Looking forward to see what others think. And then, Liz, do you want to take over? Because there is the crux of the challenge of this conversation. How do we be in service to others without feeling less than? And I think that's one of the conversations we want to have. Does anyone else have any quick reflections they'd like to share around their perceptions around servant leadership? And we'll just do this really quickly. Just want to kind of ground us as we get into our conversation with Sarah. Put up your hand, and Delbert can open your mic, and love to hear your quick thoughts if you've got any.
Sorry, if you could just hit yes on the participants in chat, and then I can see all of you.
I see Amy's put a comment in there. Be in support of the leaders that I support, be of value, do work that is needed, not for me, but for the greater good. I love that.
We got a comment from Jenny Smith.
Excellent. Jenny, do you want to unmute yourself?
Okay, I didn't actually have a comment, but now I guess I'm being asked. I will. I think it's great that we're having this conversation, and I often think it's not about leadership at all. It's about the different roles that we all play in shaping our collective future. And I think that leadership comes with connotations of hierarchy, whatever extra words you put in front of it or before it. So I think sometimes we have to just shift completely and sometimes stop trying to work within the things that we've kind of had for a long time.
Brilliant. Well said. And being put on the spot, that was brilliant. Thanks, Jenny. Appreciate that. Any other comments, feedback before we jump in?
I noticed Shakiba had a comment.
Honestly, both Liz and Jenny covered it really well, but I just wanted to say, I think, Kurt, it's an interesting comment you made around the whole rebrand of the work, because I think the model servant leadership in and of itself is steeped in a patriarchal model. And so it might actually be best to talk about it differently too. Right. Absolutely. Yes. Excellent. And so that is the journey we're on together. I really appreciate your voices. Somewhere in here, there's a book, and together we're going to put that, we're going to put that out in the world and have some conversations there. So thanks for that. Quarter after, we're right on time. Let me introduce our special guest, Sarah, who we're going to be getting to know, and you're going to love her. Sarah, and I'm just going to make sure I don't miss anything on her bio here. So Sarah is the principal of the Mazin School, which is run by the good people at the Muslim Society of Guelph. Sarah also volunteers there as the Community Services Director, where she runs outreach seminars and really engages the community around conversations around equity and accommodation. So Sarah is spending much of her leadership time, volunteer time, thinking about how organizations and individuals are accommodating to one another. Sarah was a volunteer director at the Guelph Refugee Consortium, which did some amazing work back in, holy cow, is that 2016 now?
Yep.
Unbelievable, right? Remember, that's incredible. How long ago that seems. She currently sits on the board for the Guelph General Hospital, and she's also on the grants committee of the Guelph Community Foundation, which is a really, if you're not familiar with Guelph Community Foundation, they do great work there. Sarah's on that committee that's saying, here's where we're going to be putting our funds. Sarah has a Bachelor of Environmental Science from the University of Guelph. So that's kind of Sarah's background. I think it's also, important to know that Sarah's a mom, she's a wife, she's a daughter, she's an aunt, she's a sister, she's a leader, she's a thinker, she's a doer, and she's Muslim. And so today the conversation, and again, so grateful that Sarah's been able to join us. Today we're exploring about how all these different parts of Sarah come together to celebrate the greatness that is Sarah, and kind of look for those links between faith and being in service to one another. So join me with a Four Simple Words welcome to Sarah. I want to get their hands up there. Say, Sarah, welcome. Awesome. So Sarah and I are going to have a conversation. We've got some questions. Really welcome your questions in the chat, and we've got time set aside for that as well. So as we jump in, you've got questions, please jump in, and Delbert, as they're popping up, if you can flag that for me, that would be great. Sarah, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, and thank you everyone for joining us today and taking time out of a Friday. I know everybody's ready to wind down for a weekend, and so thanks for taking that time out and being here, showing your support.
And, yeah, it's so great. And Sarah, we've had the chance to connect a little bit, and I really enjoyed getting to know you. And as I mentioned, you're a mom and you're a principal, which makes you a very brave woman. So talk to us about the back to school. How's that been for your family, and then for the school, and tell us a bit about the school.
Yeah, so Mazin School is, it's a school that we have started community-based, and it's actually a not-for-profit, which is a little bit different model than most private schools run off of. And it's in the same building as our mosque. So the Water Street, it's a large center, I would say, community center, not just the mosque. And we have K-8 school there. 53 students we welcomed back on the 8th of September. And I mean, the beginning of any school year is hectic, but this one's been a little especially hectic with new protocols and new systems and all sorts of safeguards to put in to make sure that the kids and the staff are safe. So it's been quite the hectic couple of weeks in August planning. But
Right.
we've gotten through a month. So far, so good. Everyone's healthy. Everyone is doing well. We haven't had any issues or anything. So I think the safety and the sanitization is working so far, so good. But I know there's been a bunch of cases this week in the
Right.
elementary and high schools around Guelph. So hopefully we can keep things
Under control. Yeah.
is under control. Yeah.
Yeah. So is it a
Mhm.
gift or a burden having a school of 53 kids as you're trying to plan? You know, in some ways it seems like that would make it easier, but I can imagine they're not
Yeah,
at the
so
scale that the other boards do.
until the last year, it was like, guys, we got to get our enrollment up. We've got to, because we're not for profit. So we're trying to, make this so that it breaks even at least, right? And get these kids in. Our goal really was not to make it, financial status shouldn't be a burden to being able to attend a private school or a religious-based school, because
Right.
getting that religious education, I mean, I remember as a kid being dragged out of bed on Saturday morning, and back then Saturday morning was the only time you could watch cartoons. And I hated having to miss Saturday morning cartoons and be dragged to school to get Arabic classes or to get religion classes, because nobody wants to listen to their mom and dad drone on and on after school about, more lessons, right? So you need to have that other, objective voice. But I absolutely dreaded it. And so I think it was, part of creating this was be able to give kids that during the weekdays while they're in school, which then frees up time on that weekend and weekday evenings for mom and dad to
Right.
pursue other extracurricular activities, or
Yeah.
just have family time rather than,
Mhm.
having to this class and that class and everything else. So that was part of it. And then we also saw a need for, and it was a lot of, I guess, not always, but other families that were struggling with the public school system that just needed an alternative to try to figure things out for their kids. And so
Right.
that was the purpose of setting this up as a community-based, not-for-profit school. So it was
So-
really about, we've got to get the enrollment up, guys. And now we're like 50, that's perfect. We can deal with this. We do the social distancing. We've got the classroom sizes, and this is great. We can cap at 15 and everybody can, have their distance. Teachers can be safe.
Right.
So it was,
Right.
it was good.
And I think this feeds into this idea of, how the Guelph Muslim Society wants to serve its community. You said that the school was set up to maybe help parents, or I think you used the word, we're having trouble in the regular system. Is that?
Yeah, so there's a sense of, being able to navigate the public school system. Sometimes it's hard for some. I guess it really depends sometimes what neighborhood you're in. Sometimes there's just communication issues with the teachers when they're not able to get, their point or their issues or whatever
Okay.
they're seeking across. And it was, or just making space and to make the children feel safe and comfortable in the environment that they're in. So we found that a lot of that was going on. And then, some kids were having a lot of struggles as once they hit high school, really with self-identity, because you were almost playing in two roles. You're one person, your Muslim identity, maybe in the home or in the mosque, and then at school with your peers, you're having to take on this other. And so there was a lot of social issues going on, just problems that they couldn't cope. And so we thought, if we can create a place where they feel safe to express themselves, and a place where we can make them comfortable and confident in a few years' time,
Right.
about who they are and just the skin that they're in, that maybe going forward into a high school, university, even out in the world in general, anywhere you're going, that to have that level of confidence would be, very strong for them, and
Right.
help them with mental, social, emotional issues and things that people were struggling with.
Because it's no small feat to put a school together. So, I mean, it sounds like the creation of this, of the school was in fact an act of service to the young, your children and youth in your community, right? Like it sounds
Yeah,
like
definitely.
that was one way to drive, meet their needs, right? And if we're talking about, serving the needs of others, it sounds like the creation of the school was an example of some of the good work that the
Yeah.
society's done. Yeah.
Definitely, there was a need. There was a lot of parents asking, is there something local? The GTA, Kitchener, Waterloo, they have a lot of,
Right.
Islamic-based, religious-based schools. There's a lot of Christian-based schools. Then you have the whole Catholic system. So they were like, why can't we have something where we can send our kids and feel comfortable and confident that they're learning what they need to learn
Right.
and be who they are. So
Okay.
so that was kind of almost a community ask. So we're trying to
Right.
fill that, and we're working on it still.
I
Yeah.
love it. So let's build on that and pull this up a little bit now and think about,
Sure.
let's talk about the relationship between Islam and this idea of servant leadership. And we haven't quite defined that in today's conversation, but from where you're sitting as a woman of faith, as a great community leader, as all these roles you play in your life, what's that relationship like between Islam and servant leadership?
So for me, I'm almost tempted just to leave the leadership part out and talk more about service. And for me, I mean, growing up in our household, there's, like I went to Saturday school, and you learn all the ritual stuff about the prayers and charity, fasting, pilgrimage, and all of that kind of thing. Learn to read the Quran. But one thing that my dad always emphasized when we were young growing up is that he said that there's two parts to your religion. And one is your duty to God, which is your prayers, your fasting, your charity. And that's a personal thing with him and you, between you and God or whatever higher being you feel in. But the other part is your duty to others, duty to humankind. And in Arabic, we call it huquq al-ibad. So it's almost the rights of others on you, or your duty towards others. And he said, if you don't fulfill that duty, then everything else is just ritual. It's just you, like it.
Wow, that's powerful.
What are you doing? You're just going through motions, because God is most forgiving. So even if you miss a prayer or you don't fast, God is the most merciful. He's the most forgiving. He will find it in a way to forgive you. But if you are not fulfilling your duty to other people, then none of that counts. None of that matters. So, and they demonstrated, both my mom and dad, in all their actions and in the way they carried themselves and the way they moved through life. And it was always about, if you're not good, or you're not helping, or you're not serving the people around you, then what are you doing? You have been given resources, talents, gifts by God. You are accountable for those. How are you using them? What are you doing as you're moving through life? And so that was always kind of instilled in us. And so for us, service, it went hand in hand. This was part of our religion. This was our religion. And everything else kind of followed through with that.
Right.
So, everything they did from, they came here in 1969, left their family, my parents, and, left their siblings, left their parents, and they helped build new communities. They made friends, and then they were creating like the physical spaces, the mosques and stuff that we all know and use these days, and the community centers. They were, quite literally helping with drywalling and electrical, fixtures and sewing curtains and all of that kind of stuff. So to see that constantly growing up, that, how much they were involved, and they would never consider it leadership at all. So that's why I'm kind of want to leaving out the leadership part and say that this is duty. And so yeah.
Sorry. So I love that. And maybe that comes back to, it might've been Jenny's comment earlier around that we need to be rethinking some of what this looks like. Dropping the word leadership from service, that's really clean, isn't it? Like that, it's almost unburdening. Is that fair?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And does that democratize responsibility at all? Like, is that, they're really fascinating. I hadn't, love it. Like, what's been the impact from your perspective again in your faith community and home on dropping that word leadership in front of service?
So if I were to say to my parents, I mean, you were great leaders, and they would be like, leaders, where were we leaders? We just did what needed to be done. And if I talk to anybody from that generation, you know, whom I refer to as my aunties and uncles, and they would be like, no, that's just, we needed to do that. We needed to create our spaces. We needed to create our communities. And I think leadership has this connotation of, you know, appointed position, power, maybe ego. I don't know, and it was, you know, so I guess people were kind of hesitant to take on, you know, any kind of that title because they didn't want that almost responsibility maybe that would go with it. But there was, I came across a verse in the Quran, and I'm just going to read it from, so I don't read it wrong. True servants of the most gracious, so referring to God, are only they who walk gently or humbly on the earth. And whenever the foolish address them, reply with words of peace. So you have service, you have humility and being gentle. And humility and gentleness are usually not associated with characteristics of a leader.
Right.
You know, I think in most cases. And I think that sums up when we're talking about what a servant leader should be. It should be somebody who's in service, somebody who's, you know, walking in humility or doing what they're doing because, you know, there's a need for it to be done, not for any other reason, not to stoke their ego or not to build their own power base or their likes or their popularity or whatever you want to classify it as. So,
and is that a gift of putting a faith lens to this, that in terms of the, I want to find the right word, in terms of the motivation or the grounding or the understanding, does a faith lens take away some of that need for ego or for, does it, how do I say that? Does the faith lens empower us with that humility and that coming from a place of service and of giving? Does that, do you think that is one of the ways, because I think what we're going to find from all of our speakers is that there's a definitive connection between service and faith. And I'm wondering if that's one of those commonalities that we're going to find, that it's emboldening. Maybe that's the word I'm looking for. Does a faith embolden that ability to serve?
I think, so I don't think, you know, a person has to necessarily have some sort of faith or organized religion behind being in service, because there's a lot of people who give of themselves that don't necessarily call themselves religious or spiritual. But I think for people of faith, we have that ultimate concept in our minds or in our hearts that you do as much as you can, and after that, it's in the hands of a higher power. So I think that brings a level of humility or a level of even being able to let go of that sense of control, or that I have to have it this way, or it has to work this way, that I've done what I can. Now it's up to God. And so I think faith puts that lens on it, that you have that kind of ability to say, almost take a burden off of you, that I've done what I can. And that you know, you've ceded it to a higher power and said, you know, like, it's up to you now. But you know, you're able to kind of almost take that responsibility off. But I don't think it's necessarily that you have to have, you know, that faith to be a person of service.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So as we think about all the good work that you're doing in your community through the association, through the society, and all the places, how do you describe when you describe leadership, does your faith play a role in that? Like when you're talking, and I know, you know, this idea of dropping the word leadership altogether, I love that. As you talk about the roles you're playing in your community, does your faith impact that, or do you separate those two? And then again, it just is doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
For me personally, I think my faith does impact that, because I think it's my faith that says you need to be doing because you have the ability to do.
Right.
So, you know, if I were try to say, you know, oh, that's not my responsibility, a little voice inside me would say, but yes, it is, because God
Right.
gave you this ability. He put you in this
Right.
position. So
Right.
you do have the ability to do it. Therefore, you do have the responsibility to do it. So for me, it is. Yeah, it could be just a very good Jiminy Cricket that I have following me around that tells me to do what I have to do. I don't know,
Yeah.
maybe that's God's way of blessing me with,
Right on.
do
Right
it.
on.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
mhm.
Love that. That's brilliant. Delbert, I see we've got some questions in the chat. So Sarah, is it all right? Can we just pull up some of these and reflect
Sure,
on those?
definitely.
And thanks for that poke. So this is from Liz. I think I'm starting with, I just want to make sure. Yeah, so this is from Liz. How do you think the notion of creating space to serve and be in community will change now that we can't be, or now that we can be physically together? Is that can or can't? Sorry, Liz. Do you want to unmute yourself there?
Can you,
Can't be physically together.
Can't be physically together,
Give us
yes.
an example of your parents literally creating space and community.
yeah.
How do we do that now?
Great question.
So with the pandemic, I mean, we started flipping a lot of stuff to, the virtual. So, our sermons were being or live streamed over Facebook and things like that. And we're trying to get together, the various support groups or activities and stuff like that for kids. So, I mean, again, it's hard because we can't. Within the mosque itself, we've had, the few people, the caretakers, the imams in there on a regular basis, just to make sure there is a strong hadith that says to make sure you maintain prayer in the place of prayer. So they've been going in just to do the prayers, even though other people can't be there.
All right, good.
Yeah. And so, so they have been going into the physical space and making sure everything's neat and clean. And we've actually had the opportunity to do a bunch of renovations because the building was empty over the summer. So fixed up the floorings and got new blinds put in and stuff like that. Things that's hard to do because you're, operating around so many different programs and classes and things like that. So physically we were in there maintaining, but yeah, it's a hard thing going forward. I think everybody thought, oh, by the end of the summer, everything will be good. And here we are in the second wave that's, showing numbers higher than where we were before. So,
right.
Everybody's preparing to go into that, psychologically getting ready for that, everything going virtual again.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's I think everybody's struggling with that. How do you create that, those spaces?
Great question. And maybe just a quick reflection and just the commonalities. Again, I'm hoping we're going to find some commonalities between the three faith traditions. It sounds like the problems and the challenges of how we keep community together that your mosque is facing isn't going to be dissimilar to what many churches are probably, well, all churches are facing, or synagogues, right? Like, I think regardless of the faith tradition, there is this both challenge and opportunity of how we're staying together as community, right?
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
And I think it's fair to say that all of those faiths, and I can speak to our own local church work here, we're working really hard to keep people together and build community through screens, which is sometimes hard and sometimes easy. So I think there's another commonality in terms of wanting to keep community going, even though we can't physically be together. That's a great question, Liz. Thanks. There's a great statement from my good friend Amy, who is a strong leader, and I love this comment, Amy. She says, "I think service is leadership, but leadership isn't always in service, although it should be. Service is action-oriented, solving problems, helping others, building others up, closing gaps, and that to me is leadership." What's your reflection on that, Sarah? On that comment from Amy?
Yeah, I think definitely that sums up maybe better than what I was trying to get at. I think she summarized everything. Yeah, I mean, it's often absent from people who call themselves leaders, that sense of, humility and caring for others, or, doing for the sake of doing. But anybody who's in service definitely has those qualities and those qualities of being able to lead and get things done. So
Right.
yeah,
Awesome.
I like it. Maybe I'll note that down.
I see that
Mhm.
the talented Marva Wisdom has joined us, and she's put a comment in here.
Yeah.
I think I'd love, and I think this will be a night. Let's answer this one, and then I want to come back to some of the questions we've got planned. Sarah, this is really
Sure.
great from Marva. Wise as always. Perhaps we can differentiate leader and leadership. Leader is positional and has to do with being elected, selected, or in a specific role.
Mhm.
Leadership is what's being done, the service. We all exclude leadership. We all exclude leadership at some point or other in service to others in community in the world. And I'm wondering if that kind of reflects back to your idea, Sarah, where you just want to drop the word service, or sorry, leadership off
Mhm.
servant leadership, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
So
there's so many
so
people
the difference
doing
between leader and leadership, yeah.
Yeah, again, I think everybody's summarizing my my feelings quite, succinctly here, and that it's about getting things done. I never looked at myself as like, oh, I want to be a leader in the community, so I'm going to do these things. I just started doing these things because I wanted to help people, or I felt that I was in a
Right,
position that I could help somebody. If my kids are older and I see somebody with younger kids and they're saying, hey, how did you get them through this phase? Or what did you do at this point? Or somebody that, I've been here, I was born and raised here, and maybe they just arrived here and they're like, well, how do I navigate, such and such thing? And I know I'm in a position to help or advocate or speak out for that, or, help them with something, then I am obliged. I feel like I have the responsibility to do that, but I never thought of myself as like, oh, I'm a leader, so that's why I'm going to help this person. It just kind of, I don't know, I think I'm getting still used to that, to people calling me a leader in my community. It's been, kind of a title that I've had to fit myself into and say, okay,
Right,
yeah, I
right.
am, a leader because I am trying to advocate for people. But yeah, I think people who grow up saying, I'm going to be the president, or I'm going to be the prime minister, or I'm going to be a big leader, are not necessarily starting from that place of, I'm doing services for people, or I'm doing other things for other people. That's kind of almost a different path, I think, than people saying, oh, I'll help out here, or I'll volunteer there, and finding themselves just, doing more and giving more, and then end up being in a position where people are saying, oh, they're such a great leader. Look at that. It's, it's leadership rather than an actual position of leader.
That comes back to that motivation concept, doesn't it? And I think maybe
Mm-hmm.
that's where you I think you had a great line that said, and I forget the part before it, but it was, if I'm not doing it right, it's just ritual. And that seems to tie back to this idea, and I think Marva's comment and your observation, that the motivation for serving others does indeed impact that distinction between leadership and leader. Is that fair?
Yeah,
That
so
motivation.
I was that motivation to help others
Yeah.
in terms of that religious lens was that, if you're just, and I'll say it more the way my parents used to say it, because when we do our prayer, so there's actual like physical motions to it, and part of it is where you actually put your head to the ground in prostration. And so my mom used to say that if you're not, doing the other stuff and being good to everyone around you, and it's just banging your head on the ground. so why are you just banging your head on the ground?
That's great.
Or if you're not being nice to one another, or you're biting your sibling's head off while you're fasting. My grandmother apparently used to say to her that if I move the hay from in front of the donkey, he's fasting too. So what's the difference between your fasting and his fasting if you're not doing the other parts, right?
Right.
So
Right.
I mean, they seem kind of crass, but they were really good analogies if you think about it.
That's brilliant. I love it. Sounds like your grandmother was a wise woman too. Yes.
Yeah, she's a very wise woman.
That's brilliant. So let's build on that. Let's maybe, and again, we've checked in because we want to have this conversation. It's been a hard week. The past week has been a hard one for the Muslim community in Guelph. And there's been, for those of you that don't know, there was some threats of violence against two Muslim men who were having a conversation on a porch, who, you know, felt threatened and in fact, you know, attacked. So Sarah, let's kind of circle back to that as we think about leadership and playing a role in our community. What's it like to be, and I'm using the word leader here from a place of honoring, what's it like to be a leader, you know, from the mosque right now in Guelph? Like what's the past week been like for you?
It's been, yeah, it's been pretty hectic and challenging, and we've had a lot of having to handle inquiries and stuff from media, as well as try to help work through it. You know, at the mosque themselves, people upset, you know, what happened, what are the details, and why is this happening, and, you know, feeling generally unsafe. You know, worried about what's the impact going to be on their kids, you know, because you want your kids to be able to, you know, play freely. And I think the most hard that really affected us was, you know, you kind of almost mentally prepare for it when you leave your home, when you're going to the park or to the mall or to anywhere else, especially if you're visibly, you know, a Muslim, like if I'm wearing the headscarf, and you kind of have that in the back of your mind. You make sure you're with, you know, somebody else, or your kids are playing together. You have this kind of mental preparation of that. But these two guys were standing on the front porch of their home. They were on the front steps, and all of a sudden now, you know, this happened. This guy comes up to them and starts making very specific threats, you know, motions to slit his throat and things like this. And it was, so that was really unnerving. And especially like just 3 weeks ago, a man who was a security guard, not even like an official security guard, he was just acting as the person at the front door to register people. Because of COVID, everybody's having to register to go into the mosque and that kind of thing. So for contact tracing and things like that. So he was doing that at the front of the mosque in the prayer, and somebody did slit his throat and he died within minutes outside the mosque. And this was in Scarborough. And that was three weeks ago. And so then to have him kind of imitating the exact same motion and you know, doing that, it's really unsettling. And it's, so there's been a lot of, you know, emotion, to say the, you know, the least in the community. And then we've been, you know, we had one discussion already with the Guelph Police Force, and just pressing forward on that to make sure with when the time comes at the investigation that is hopefully classified as a hate motivated crime, and that it's important to label it as such, to make sure we have accurate statistics, to make sure people are aware of what's going on and, you know, why things are going on. It's one thing to, you know, you have statistics about assault and things like this, but specifically hate motivated, whether it's Islamophobic, anti-Semitic, anything at all, we need to have that data so that you can then go forward to, you know, your levels of government and say, hey, something has to be done. You need to start looking at these, you know, extremist groups, these, you know, alt-right, social media restrictions, all of that kind of thing. But without that data and that stats, you have nothing to back that up to say, hey, we need this done. So that's kind of our next level of adding pressure. And so it's work, it's ongoing.
So, you know, and thank you for sharing. And of course, you know, I think all our hearts break when we hear those kind of stories. It doesn't reflect the community that any of us on this call want to be living in. What, in terms of, again, I'm putting the word leader in front of it, but as a leader in your community now, you talked about this a little bit, but what are the additional burdens or weights that your communities may be feeling now because of that experience?
And it's so, I don't know, it's so hard to put into words. I think there's, you want your kids to be safe growing up. You want them to have a place. You don't want them to have to constantly be having this, you know, double life or double identity where they have to be one thing and then they have to be another thing to fit in for their safety. you know, so it puts that extra emotional mental burden on people. Then there's kind of like, why can't we be part of this society or this community? Why are we treated so differently? You know, there's all those questions that go on, and it's, I don't know, there's so many things we could get into another hours of talk.
Yeah, absolutely.
Off of that. So,
and I thank you for sharing that. And the reason I was asking, starting with that question, is how do those of us on the call, how does the rest of our community serve the Muslim community right now? What's your, you know, for those of us that want to be supportive, be allies, what are your thoughts on how other parts of our community can be serving the Muslim community right now?
I guess in this particular instance would be to continue putting that pressure. We've talked about making statements and getting as many of our allies and our supporters together to really make it clear that Guelph is not going to accept that kind of behavior, that kind of behavior will be called out, and that we are a community that welcomes everyone. So, you know, even somebody who is thinking or having thoughts that they might be able to, you know, get some supporters and you know, do whatever the anti protest, or, you know, take back Canada or take back Guelph, or whatever that, you know, kind of rhetoric they want to put out there, that there's no space for them here, and they should, you know, they should find some other place to go. I think that's really what we can do, and it's not just for Muslims. I would say for any group, anybody, whether it's, you know, anybody from our BIPOC community, anybody from our LGBTQ community, anybody, you know, that we are a community that we have each other's backs, and we're all in this together. We're not gonna make space or room for people who can't be accepting of everyone.
Yeah, well said. Thank you for that. We've got a few minutes left. Are there any other I got a few other questions for Sarah, but any other questions based on what we've heard today, the conversations, any questions people would like to put in the chat or put to Sarah before we?
I got one from Marva. I was hoping that she could read it out for us.
Oh, brilliant. Okay. Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Albert.
And looks like she got bumped. Sorry, 1 second. I'm just going to let her in first. Hello, Marva. Would you be able to read out your question for us?
Marva, can you hear us? Maybe not. That's a great question. Marva, are you there? Well, tell you what, thanks for flagging that, Delbert. Oh, I see she's connecting to audio. Marva, if you, I'll start reading the question. If you get connected to audio, jump in, and by all means, these are your words. So this is from Marva, with a statement and a bit of a question. It says, thank you, Sarah. I love your cricket analogy. The Muslim community is certainly not a monolith. One of the local Muslim community's opportunity and challenges of the work with the uniqueness of many graphic and racial identities. Oh, so I think it's what are some of the opportunities and challenges of the work with the uniqueness of many geographic and racial identities within the Muslim community? That's a great question. So what are some of the gifts and the challenges that come from, Islam being not just one thing? Great question, Marwa. Thank you.
I think a lot of people don't realize that when you walk into the mosque on any given Friday, you will see at least 40 different ethnicities and languages. So we have people from all over the world, from Africa, from Middle East, from Asia, from East Asia, as well as European, background. And so balancing those ethnicities, balancing the languages,
Right.
where, you know, the majority do speak English, but you always have a few that are maybe feeling more comfortable and need things in a different language. So there's a lot of different needs and backgrounds to cater to. And I think just working off the word cater, when we have our community events, one of the biggest things is, where's the food coming from? Because you got 40 different ethnicities, and everybody, the Arab group wants their Arab food, and in our South Asian community, we want biryani, of course. I mean, and then there's, from stuff that I've never tasted from, Somalia, from Nigeria, from Indonesia, so when they do a community potluck, it's the craziest buffet you have ever seen,
Well, it
because
sounds like
there
the
is
best
stuff
thing in the
from
world, to be
all
honest with you.
over the
Yeah.
world.
Yeah,
So,
loving it.
I mean, so that's just one of the most basic things. We have an event every January, and I hope we'll be able to do it again. But it's called Building Bridges, and that's one of the big things. They're
Right.
like, if you guys are doing biryani, then make sure it's mild and not spicy, so the rest of us can eat it. And it's just this kind of like
Okay.
the discussions over the menu are more
That's hilarious.
intense than the actual, agenda, or the program
That's
for
great.
the evening, or who's the keynote speaker going to be. Like, we can all agree on who the keynote speaker will be, but we cannot agree on that menu. That's, one of the huge things there.
On the degree, so it's not just us white people who can't handle the too much heat. That's good to know. All right.
There's people from, so Middle Eastern cuisine is not spicy the way South Asian cuisine is spicy.
Right.
It's a
Yes.
very different type of spicy. But I mean, those are just, some of the more fun challenges.
That's a great example.
But we do have, we have people like me. I have 4 generations of family here in Guelph. So my grandmother, my parents, me and my husband, my children, we are all here. My kids were born and raised in Guelph. I've lived in Guelph for most of my life. And then we have families that have just arrived, and some have arrived as immigrants. And so they're, what you would consider maybe economic immigrants, just looking for, better education system or something to maybe, and they're in a fairly good position financially. Then you have the refugees that have a whole different series of needs and things that we need to assist with and help them with settlement. So there's this whole range of people. You have professionals, you have businessmen, you have, your teachers and doctors and engineers and all of that, and as well as your lay people, your people who are working at, the local factories, the Linamar plants, or so we've got this whole range of and diversity of people, and each and every one has different needs that need to be helped and fulfilled. But I mean, they're all coming together for religion and for prayer. And so that's what unifies us and bonds us.
I love that. Great question, Marva. Great answer, Sarah. And I'm conscious we got about 4 minutes left. Delbert, thanks for flagging that.
We got 2 questions left.
I do. And I'm gonna, maybe we'll circle back. Thanks for flagging that. We got a couple good questions in there. I want to make sure we break on time and let people get off. So maybe we'll have Sarah reflect on some of those questions, and we'll maybe put those answers up at our blog. The parting question for Sarah, and then we'll do a quick thank you, is what's your call to action for us today, Sarah? As individuals interested in serving, and again, quickly, just and not to overthink it in terms of what's your call to action to us today as we head into the rest of our days, weekends, and lives.
I think the call to action would be listen and learn. So, I mean, we're all here listening, and I'm learning from your questions as well. And I think we need to move out of our comfort zones. I don't think this is about, you're not going to go and convert people who are already on an extremist viewpoint. But what we are going to do is learn from one another and see how we can support each other, what we can do together, because we all have a common goal, I think, here. And otherwise we wouldn't be on this call together, I think. And so for me to learn from you, for you to learn from me, and to move forward, because, you know, we're in our kind of our boxes or our circles that we are used to and we are comfortable with. And I think we need to step out of those as well. And the more we do that and learn about one another, I think the more we can crowd out those who are on those extreme edges, who are trying to raise a ruckus and move things in not so good directions.
Yeah, love it. Wise. Sarah, thank you so much. What a gift your humor and your insights and your honesty has been. So can we give Sarah 4 Simple Words applause there?
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. What a gift. Thank you. Thank you to you all for joining us. I am just so grateful that people are interested in jumping on this conversation around what servant leadership is. And I encourage you to continue pushing me and challenging me on it. And you can do that a few simple ways. So again, forgive the commercials here. FourSimpleWords.ca is our website. That's where our blog is. That's where a lot of our conversations are happening. You can find a link to all of our past forums as well. We updated our social this summer, so I encourage you to follow us on all the major platforms where we're putting out thoughts and reflections. Sign up for our newsletter. We're going to keep the discipline around a newsletter. You all know it's a tough one. We're going to get back in a monthly habit on that, sharing some of the reflections that we're learning here. Preview, we're launching something called Dialogues, and this is an invitation where I'm going to have a 1-hour deep dive conversation with really smart people. And the concept is I'm going to bring the idea of service to the conversation. The other person's going to bring anything else they want to chat about. It could be racial equity. It could be how to build a car. It could be whatever. And I'm just looking to hear people's passions and interests as it relates to serving others. So I'm launching that on Monday. Quick preview for you. If you go to FourSimpleWords.ca/dialogues, you can sign up there. I welcome any and all voices on that. Again, all with this goal of building up this knowledge and this understanding of what it means to serve others and how we're going to package this up and change the world. A reminder that on October 30th, my good friend Lakdeep Dhaliwal is going to be joining us for another one of our mini-series. We're going to be talking about Sikhism, and Lakdeep radiates joy. He's a beautiful person. You're going to love him. And then on November 27th, we've got the lovely, the talented, the man, the myth, the legend, John Borthwick, who's going to be joining us as well. So if you haven't already signed up for those 2 sessions, please do. Very grateful for that. And again, follow us at FourSimpleWords.ca.